Hello, welcome to Matters of Substance. Thank you for joining us today. We have a very special guest. Thank you for coming on in. We have Natalie Muskin-Press. Hello, Natalie.
Hello.
Natalie is with Valparaiso University. She is a licensed clinical addictions counselor, and she works for the Campus Recreation and Wellbeing Department. She is charged with being the Assistant Director of Prevention and Wellness Education in that department. And so Natalie has graciously joined us today to share a little bit about what she sees on campus life and talk about some of the things that we have conversations with her about throughout our work here in prevention. And so we're going to just kind of dive right in. So Natalie, would you be able just to kind of give a little background about what you do for the listeners, and then we will go from there?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I am tasked with areas around prevention and wellness and intervention, specifically around substance use or misuse, sexual assault prevention, suicide prevention, and then just general wellness. So I've just kind of a broad hat. When it comes to the substance use area, things that I am looking at is making sure that I'm there to provide direct services to the students, whether that be assessments or substance use treatment, as well as hosting programs that educate them, making sure that they have access to harm reduction methods, the knowledge that they need to be safe, to be responsible, and to make as healthy of a choice as they want to.
Oh, wow. So you have a lot, like you said, many hats, right?
Yes.
So I want to talk about prevention, but before we get there, I don't want to lose track of, you talked about harm reduction. You guys have some of that going on, and a lot of people aren't quite sure of what harm reduction is. I think it's kind of a broad piece of just kind of wording that can look very different for depending on where you're at, right? Yeah. And so we have some harm reduction things here like Narcan, fentanyl testing strips, but that might look different for you all. So what is that for you guys as the university?
Yeah, so there's lots of different ways we implement harm reduction. We have a medication drop box on campus for excess medications, which you guys were excellent in helping us get, so thank you for that. I do a lot of my feedback and intervention stuff is around responsible drinking, recognizing signs of alcohol poisoning, making sure students know how to intervene, making sure that we're highlighting our policies that increase students reaching out for help. So whether that be the Indiana's Lifeline Law, making sure that they're aware of that, the amnesty policy, making sure that our policies are supportive of students getting help versus getting punished is really key, because we want, as we always say, like, we want people to make safe choices, and we want those safe choices to make sure that they're keeping people alive and healthy and things like that. We'll talk a lot about how to keep your blood alcohol content level in a healthy range, how fast it rises, ways of drinking that are more likely to lead to alcohol poisoning or negative consequences, that type of thing.
So you mentioned the Indiana Lifeline Law, and that's something that I don't know if everybody's aware of. I'd love for you to explain what you share with the students there.
Yeah, sure. So as we explain it, the Indiana Lifeline Law is a Good Samaritan law. It's an amnesty law. So it indicates that if you've been out, you've been underage drinking, and you see that someone needs help, what it does is, as long as you call for help, stay and cooperate with those that arrive, you'll be shielded from any underage drinking charges or anything like that, because we know that students are scared to get in trouble. And we've seen this in high school level and also in college level. They're scared to get in trouble, so they won't call for help. And so letting them know that, like, if you do the right thing in this moment, you're gonna have some amnesty around legal charges. The university does not punish students who need medical attention. Like, it's not a violation of our policy. We don't allow alcohol in our residence halls, but if a student needs medical attention, they're not going to get in trouble for that. So that's another thing we stress with them, that if a student needs help, neither you or the student are going to get in any sort of like trouble with the university, as long as you cooperate and work with us. So.
That's so important for people to know, I think. Yeah, because I can imagine, like, going back into, my younger years when I, was not a minor, and I was, having some drinks with friends, we were lucky never to get in trouble or to a point where we needed that help. But had we, our brains aren't developed until we're like 26. So would we have made the right call, right? And so knowing that they have that protection there, as somebody who is legally partaking in consuming alcohol, even still it can be scary, right? Because, we're very drunk or very intoxicated, or maybe they are under the age, which of course we don't promote, but it is possible that that's going to happen. We want to make sure that they're feeling that the person that they're with, their safety is the utmost importance, right? So that's so important. I'm glad that you guys take some focus on that and share that with your students and let them know, like, hey, this trumps everything. The safety of you and your friends trumps, getting a consequence here. So
Absolutely.
So that's wonderful. So that's some harm reduction techniques we have going on there. That's great. You mentioned the drop box that was sponsored by the council. We have those throughout our community, but I had talked with Chuck Garber, who is I believe, chief, or is that assistant chief?
He is chief, not chief of police. Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't quite sure. Chief of police over at Valparaiso University, and he had told me recently that it was going pretty well, and so I'm really glad that we were able to partner on that and that it's serving the campus. So that's really great. Then you kind of talked a little bit about how you do education. So you mentioned that you share about how much you can consume before it gets to a dangerous level, things like that. So how do the students find those education pieces? Do they think it's helpful, or what are their kind of responses to that?
So generally, they seem to enjoy anything that kind of engages them as like adults making their own decisions. We see that there's a positive response to both personalized feedback and feedback that's less about don't do this and more like here's how to do this safely. So we will put out some tables. We will, lure them with like candy and giveaways. But then when they're there, they'll be able to maybe leave with a BAC card that matches their gender and weight, that gives them like a rough idea about how much over how long. Can they stay in the green zone? Can they drink and stay in the green zone? We have a assessment that's completely anonymous that gives like direct personal feedback, so they can take that and get exact feedback on their behaviors, and also it focuses on what, if they wanted to change, what they would want to change and how to do it. So it allows them to get that really personalized feedback on their behavior. And we'll do screening days throughout the year where we'll have students just come in, take the assessment, and then they can get that feedback right away.
So that sounds like a really handy tool to have. Mm-hmm. I kind of like the idea of having like something you can carry with you, right? Because you can have that one-time conversation and that's good in that moment, but maybe 2 months down the road, you're like, oh, was it, 5 drinks or 2 drinks, and it can kind of, maybe your memory gets a little hazy on that. So that's a really nice tool to have for them so that they can carry that with them and make sure they're staying safe. And you touched on, they respond well because they're feeling like, okay, I'm an adult and I get to make my own safe decisions. And I think that is kind of the center, in my opinion, of a lot of our prevention measures. Mm-hmm. Giving youth the ability to feel in control of what they're doing and making their decisions and kind of modifying their behavior as they see fit is probably one of the things that I find to be very beneficial when we talk about prevention. Oftentimes when it's just education, that's not bad, but partnering with choice is really helpful.
Yeah, I found that letting students pick and choose what behaviors they would want to change, even if I'm working like individually with a student, like, well, what part of the way you drink isn't working for you, or what part would you like to see change, and talking about how we can try to see that, and is that realistic, but based on the behavior you want to continue, it might be that you're always going to have to deal with this unless you change this behavior, and getting them to kind of think about it and make their own choices and decisions around that.
Yeah. So when you're having these conversations, have you ever asked, or do they ever just kind of share with you, like, is this something that they've talked about before coming to college? Because I'm kind of wondering, as you're sharing this, it's bringing to mind, like, are our parents having those conversations? Are they getting education in the school before they are off on their own as adults making decisions? where's their knowledge base starting?
Yeah, it's interesting. They don't usually mention their parents, but I also don't ask. So that would be an interesting piece. We do sometimes ask them, like, where have you learned about alcohol or substance use before? And a lot of times they'll identify like school programs that they were in. There are some things that they definitely come in knowing. I think we've done a really good job of like, what is a drink, right? And they'll usually be aware of that. And then we have to have a conversation about how all the different ways the alcohol industry it knows you know that, and now they're trying to make it really hard for you to, whether it be like, why is when you're 21 and you go to the go out to a restaurant, why are the drafts specials always cheaper than the bottle specials? And it's because drafts are 16 ounces and bottles are 12 ounces, and they want you to drink a little more and then spend a little more. And we talk a little bit about that and how to recognize, like, if it looks like an odd-sized can, you should always check the alcohol content by volume. You never know. It's not. You can't just assume that everything in a can is in the 5% range, right? So.
Yeah, and especially as we have over the last several years, I guess we had this burst of craft beers and things like that, and we've just kind of. I feel like from a personal standpoint, this is just my opinion. I'm not sure that this is founded in data or research, but I feel like I've kind of seen the increase of those to a degree, like, a little bit of more alcohol content in this drink and just kind of easing that barrier up a little bit. And I'm sure there are caps and limits to how much can be in something. But I feel like we've been slowly creeping up in different areas. Well, this is a craft beer, so it's 9% versus 5 or, whatever. And so that's a great piece. I appreciate that you guys are having that conversation and finding out, one, what's their knowledge base on it, and two, educating them, because we know, and this is maybe a harsh comment, but, alcohol is a for-profit industry, right? And unfortunately, alcohol is addictive. That's just the facts of it. And so the more you consume, there's probably a greater risk associated. So I'm super excited to hear that you guys are trying to educate around that. Like, okay, check your labels, because that's the best thing we can do for ourselves to understand what we're consuming, whether it's alcohol or anything else. So
yeah, absolutely.
So that's wonderful. In the past, you and I have talked about how you have some piece of early intervention. So if you have identified somebody has violated, I don't know if it's violating a campus policy or if it's just, there's been a party at their home or whatever that looks like. I know that you guys identify people who may have consumed alcohol or whatever the case may be, whatever the substance is. And then you guys have early interventions. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like on the campus?
Yeah, so it depends on how things happen, right? We do have our residence hall policies. And so generally speaking, we have a step-by-step process, right? So we do know that just because someone has been caught with alcohol does not mean they necessarily have an alcohol problem, but we want to make sure that we're giving them the tools. So it may start with an educational piece where they have to just make sure they are knowledgeable. Then it'll step up to the anonymous. We usually will, encourage them or require them to take that anonymous survey so that they can get that honest assessment and then get provided resources. And then if we see students who are kind of continuously struggling and being noticed for violations, they'll meet with me. We'll do some one-on-one assessment and feedback and give them maybe some higher level tools or encourage them to connect with specific resources if needed.
And so you guys have, are you guys connected with resources in the area so that they can be referred to them and hopefully get in a little bit easier, because it can be challenging sometimes?
Yeah, so, I have great connections in the community. I know what's out there. I used to work at Porter Stark. I know what meetings potentially to recommend to give them an idea. I really liked Recovery Connection having the Smart Recovery programs. Those have been a lot easier, I think, for college students to kind of wrap their heads around, especially with this kind of mentality that it's fine if it's in college, right? We have to kind of break through a little bit of that, alcohol is alcohol, whether it's on a college campus or not. And if you're drinking it too much, you may need some help. But Smart Recovery has been, both like having the online classes or online meetings has been really helpful. I use that a lot as I encourage people to branch out or get some extra support.
We have talked a little bit about smart recovery, but not much here on the podcast. Can you just give the listeners a little bit of explanation about smart recovery, if you know? I mean, I don't know if that's really your field of expertise, but if you do have a little bit of inclination, it sounds like you probably do. Would you share just a little bit about that?
Yeah, so smart recovery is a little bit more based in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, lots more about tools to decrease usage. It doesn't have abstinence as the both immediate or ultimate goal. It has reduction or potentially elimination of substance use, but it doesn't kind of start from there. So I found that for students, especially when we see students sometimes what they're having trouble with is the binge drinking, right? We see students who think everyone binge drinks, and so they think that's how they have to, and then they can get caught in this cycle of, I don't know how to have fun if I'm not drunk, and how do I break that pattern? And for them, they're not drinking most of the time. And it's really just when they decide to go out, they don't know how to do it in a healthy way, or they don't know how to recognize when they're maybe shouldn't be putting alcohol into their bodies. We talk a lot about, should you be drinking if you're upset? Should you be drinking if you're nervous? Should you be drinking if you're socially anxious? Are these things that alcohol helps? Or in the long run, does alcohol hurt? And so smart recovery is really helpful for them, exploring those maybe underlying reasons that can cause their drinking to feel a little bit more out of control, or maybe they have consequences that they don't want, but they don't know why. So
I love that it highlights the reason behind, because I was kind of thinking, just as before you got there, I'm processing what you're saying, and I was like, oh yeah, because I'm sure there's a good chunk of students possibly that, say I have social anxiety or I'm uncomfortable and this is why I do it. And so, I mean, that's great that you kind of examine why in smart recovery. Why? What's your reason? And is it the right reason, right? Is it just because you want to do this and it's not to self-medicate anything? Okay, that's a little different than saying, I'm not feeling happy and I'm going to have a few drinks to, bring me up, because we're definitely treading some territory there that's not healthy.
Right. And that's what we always kind of talk about is, we talk about it as a progression. So maybe you just start to have some fun when you go out and you drink a little more. Maybe you start to take the edge off when you go out, and then maybe you start to do that for other things, and how you can start to see alcohol as a solution to a problem. And then the next thing you know, it becomes the only solution to a problem. And so talking to them a little bit about it as a behavioral choice, I think is really helpful, because they can kind of, I think that makes sense to them. I think they get this idea of, oh yeah, I'm nervous, so I have a drink and then I don't feel nervous, but I guess that makes sense that that's not the best way to deal with nerves. And so.
And then within that, are they also learning positive coping mechanisms as well?
Yeah, we do a big substitution piece, right? If alcohol has been meeting a need for you or helping you handle something difficult, you can't just take alcohol away, because you're just going to feel out there and alone. And so how do we replace it, right? So if you don't want to go out on Friday nights anymore, is it realistic to be okay, I'm just going to sit in my room on Friday nights? Or should you be actively planning an event maybe off campus with some friends, right? Or should you be asking someone to do something with you that doesn't involve alcohol? You can't just take something away because that is meeting a need, right? So how do we swap that need with something that's healthy?
Yeah, I love that. That's great. Sounds like you guys have a full understanding of the spectrum of what the students might need when we're talking about how alcohol plays a role in their experience as a student. Because once again, if they're 21 and older, they are legally allowed to do this. And so it's not to say you can't, it's to say, how do we do it in a healthy way and appropriately? So I appreciate that you guys are fighting the good fight on that, because it can be challenging.
No, definitely.
So you talked about Recovery Connection, and I don't want to, this isn't about Recovery Connection, but I just wanted to share, they are a really great agency. So if you're listening and you're not from Porter County, I would certainly encourage you to take a look at some of your recovery resources in the area and the community, because sometimes they do have these programs that can partner well with teens, with young adults. It's not all necessarily about if you want to go to NA or AA. And so there are those kinds of different agencies within communities. So I encourage you to either reach out to your local community coalition like we are, Substance Misuse Coalition, where we try to provide prevention and all that. So reach out to them and they can connect you with other resources, especially if you are a parent of a young teen, because you are coming into some territory where this is likely going to be coming up, and you want to make sure you have all the resources possible to help prevent that. That being said, nice little plug there for Recovery Connection. I just think they're wonderful. You mentioned that there was a survey that you guys do with the students, but I wanted to kind of pull out the piece about how there's also a survey that is statewide that you all do and you participate in to kind of look at those trends of what you see on campus in terms of alcohol consumption. Can you share, well, before you go into that, I do want to lay the groundwork of this is a survey that also is in similarity administered to high school students. So they're from the same agency, so I assume they probably have similar questions. I'm not sure exactly what's on the college level one, but for the one that's on the high school level and the middle school level, it basically tries to evaluate what is going on with youth in terms of substance use. And that varies from alcohol to prescriptions that aren't theirs, marijuana, tobacco, all of the substances it encompasses. And it gives us as prevention providers an understanding of what's going on in our communities and helps us inform what programs we choose to use. And so similarly, we have the college one as well, and I think that's great, and you guys utilize that. And so could you just talk a little bit about what you guys see reported, the trends surrounding, you talked about holidays earlier off mic, and maybe you don't have that data, but how there could be differences in that and why you choose to survey at certain times. And then also how COVID has affected what you guys have seen on this survey. I'd really appreciate hearing a little bit about that. And I think the the listeners might find this interesting.
Yeah, so I think one thing that's really something that if you're not familiar with colleges and what substance and alcohol use in particular on colleges looks like, is that our drinking and binge drinking rates have actually been pretty stable since maybe the mid to late 90s. And what we usually see is that when we do surveys, we usually survey within a particular time period. So every 2 weeks or in the last month. And what we see is that at any given time period, we're usually at around 70% of students admit to consuming about some alcohol, whether it be a single drink or more, and then about 30% haven't. So I say at any given time, right, a third of college students aren't drinking on the weekends generally. So there's also this piece where I think there's this idea that everyone drinks in college, and it's actually, one, not only does not everyone drink, not everyone drinks all the time. So you'll have people who do drink, but maybe only once a month or on special occasions, or not until they turn 21. And so there's different ways that those numbers kind of manifest themselves. And then one thing we saw in COVID, which is different than I think a lot of the other statistics, more society-wide, is that we saw a significant decrease in substance use and binge drinking. We took the survey, I forget if it was spring of 21, but we took it when we were, spring of 21, because we're doing it in spring of 23, when we were on campus, but not fully, right? We still had significant COVID precautions. There were students who were there were lots of classes who were hybrid or online fully. There just wasn't as many activities. And so what we actually saw was that that student drinking decreased pretty significantly. It's between 10 to 20 percentage points. I can't quite remember. So we'll be surveying again in the spring. So it'll be interesting to see if we fully bounce back, if there's some stabilization, if we land somewhere in the middle, and what that may look like going forward. So,
yeah, and for people who haven't looked at the Indiana Youth Survey, we see that there is that perception, kind of going back to that, because now the second time you've mentioned, and I think it's important that At least in high school, we know that the perception of use is much different than the actual use. And so for high school students, they believe a lot of their peers are participating in substance use when they're typically not. The percentage of use is actually much smaller than what the actual use is much smaller than the perception of use. And so is that similar in college? Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the main strategies in college substance use prevention is peer norming, because we do see this, right? It's pretty consistent for us to see that students will indicate on average when they do go out, how many drinks do they have. And again, one thing we also see is we talked about 70% may indicate drinking. And of that 70%, over 2/3 are not binge drinking. So our binge drinking population at any given time is like less than a third of the 70% that's drinking. I don't know math to break that out. But we consistently see that they overestimate how much their peers drink on average by usually around a drink, if not more. And so we actually spend lots of time talking about that when I do workshops or discussions or any sort of conversation with students. That's one of the things we talk about a lot, and they highlight, media, what we view as what it means to come to college and its parties, and they think about how if they hear a story about the weekend, it's usually about someone drinking. If they remember someone from the night, it's usually someone who had had too much to drink, right? No one talks about the people who came and had like 2 drinks and left quietly and got home at a reasonable hour and got up for work and didn't have a hangover, right? That's not a story we're going to share the next day. And so there really is just a vacuum of acknowledgement around less reckless forms of drinking, and so the other type fills the void, right? It just seems like if we're talking about alcohol, we're only talking about it in this way, and so then therefore that must be what it all looks like. And so that's what a lot of peer norming kind of pushes back on, this idea that if you are drinking responsibly, you are in the majority. Or if you feel pressure to drink more, like that's actually not a pressure that's there. And we do hear that most college students indicate they don't feel pressure to drink from their peers, but the pressure sometimes comes internally, right? I need to keep up. I need to be cool. This is what college is about. That type of thing.
I like how you've mentioned that now the second time as well, that this is what college is about, right? So it's a lot about our perception that we have even before we get there. Like when you go to college, like I remember when I was younger, and now this is a little while ago, but when I was heading off to college, I had the choice to either go away or to stay home. And I remember when I was considering going away and not going to the community college, I had kind of thought, like, what does this look like? And is there going to be a lot of drinking, or they're going to, what am I going to come into contact with? Because the concept and what everybody talks about is like, oh, you're going to go and there's going to be all these parties. And for me, that was not something I get a little bit of social anxiety, I think, sometimes. And that was like not an appeal to me. And it actually influenced why I stayed home. But yeah, I remember that was a lot of the conversation surrounding what it looked like to go to college. And there's going to be all these things that you're going to do. And, so yeah, I think kind of changing like the peer norming, like you said, I think changing the narrative of that, they're here and now you can see, look, this isn't necessarily your perception, and what you think you were going to come into when you came to college isn't necessarily how it all plays out. And that's helpful, because I think peer influence does matter, mm-hmm. right? And so if they know, okay, I'm in the norm, I'm in the, what most people are doing range, it feels a little safer to be there. So that's great that you guys are promoting that and helping them understand that they really are doing what most people are doing. And it's great to highlight that we have this vacuum, right, of like the positive experiences that getting shared, and mm-hmm. we have like a lot of the negative kind of highlighted, and I can see how that's really beneficial to talk to them about that. So that's great. I haven't really heard people doing that before when we talk about prevention and education. Mm-hmm. So that's wonderful. I like it. So we've talked about your role as kind of like that early intervention. We've talked about how you have some prevention efforts. We've talked about the trends that we've seen, and I find it so interesting that we saw a reduction during COVID, because that is opposite of what we saw nationally. So that's kind of interesting, and I'm intrigued to see what you guys find out here in the 2023 survey, because I wonder if it's changed. Where have we gone with that? And I also kind of have that curiosity, and I don't know that we have the answer just yet, or if we ever will. But why? What were those factors? I mean, I'm sure there were multiple factors that changed.
Yeah. So one of the things that, again, working in college campuses, what you learn really quickly is the environment plays a big role. So really effective policies look at environment, either individually based interventions or environment-based interventions. So interventions that make it safe, not allowing alcohol in the residence halls. If you do allow alcohol events on campus, having strict policies in place so that they don't get out of hand, things like that. So we do know that when we look at college students, what we see less often than diagnosable like addiction is reckless drinking, so binge drinking, which is why we do a lot of harm reduction around alcohol poisoning, right? These are students who most of the time are being responsible but could have a night where they drink too much, and we want to make sure that doesn't ruin not only like take their life but like cause them significant long-term distress. So we want to help them in that. And so that environment piece really is something that bigger schools, smaller schools, everyone has their own ways of dealing with it. And I think with COVID, what we saw was that a lot of our students didn't really merge social groups as they moved through the year. So what you usually see, right, is students come in on campus and they start joining organizations, they start meeting more people, their social group starts to get bigger, they start to meet different people, more opportunities. And so that's how their social circles can move. But I think with COVID, we saw more reluctance to be in large groups of people, indoors, and without masks and things of that nature. And so I think just the environment wasn't conducive to the behavior that would lead to reckless drinking. And so hopefully some things I'd love to see from there is maybe this continued dedication to just not needing to have large gatherings with alcohol, and large being for Valpo, it's a small school, so large, it's all a spectrum. So yeah.
Yeah, I hope that we kind of follow that trend, right? Mm-hmm. Certainly, because we're all about reducing substance use, especially that risky level of it. So yeah. You guys have so much going on over mm-hmm. there. We are just about out of time, but I wanted to just ask real quick if you could share, are there any events going on that you wanted to promote? I believe you guys have a forum coming up in October that's put on by PATH and PATH and the Tobacco Coalition are doing mm-hmm. something about, I think, more younger youth, but...
Yeah, so we actually have 3 big events kind of coming up in the next month or so. So September 27th, PATH is doing a forum specifically around teen nicotine vaping use. So that is out there. Registration is open for people. So that is a great event that's coming up. And then on Monday, October 3rd, we are going to have a... suicide prevention mm-hmm. exhibit, which will be open to the community. It's called Send Silence Packing. So that will be in our, hopefully weather permitting, right just out there open on the main campus. So it is a visual exhibit that people can peruse as they like. And it's about college students who've been lost to suicide, and it'll allow you to spend some time with their family and their loved ones, words, things that they have said about how that loss has impacted them. They'll also be able to meet local community resources, Porter Stark Services, also helping us sponsor this to bring this to campus. So they will be there to kind of introduce themselves as a resource to the students in the community. But that will be happening on October 3rd. And then we will be doing, third week in October, a community art recovery project that it's all over town. It's been traveling and all over town, and so we'll be hosting that at Valpo.
Oh, wonderful. I've heard of the community art event. Mm-hmm. I think they're doing one each month, right?
Yes, so we're the October.
Very cool. Well, I'm glad to hear you guys are partnering on that. It sounds like a pretty awesome thing. I have not yet made it, but now maybe I can make it over there. We're not too far.
There you go.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. it's great to kind of get a perspective from that college level group, because it's an important group that we want to partner with, but it can be hard, right? Because it's not illegal to drink, but we still have to be thoughtful about the concerns around that, and those risky level of consumption. So thank you for joining us today. It was great to hear from you. And if you guys have any questions, is there any way that people can reach out to you if they wanted to get involved with anything going on at Valpo University and help out with these things?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can either reach out to my email directly, or you can reach out to prevention.wellness@valpo.edu, and that's my general office email. I did want to also highlight the Send Silence Packing. It's hosted by Active Minds. So if you have a college student, you're about to have a college student, I really recommend Active Minds. It's a national organization to look into. We have a chapter on campus, but it's really about decreasing stigma around mental health, and it's a great resource, as well as the JED Foundation is another excellent resource around mental health and college students in particular.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us.